This is a sad one because when I recorded this episode of Happy Times and Places, I was full of positive things to say about the actress Patricia Prior, who plays Mrs. Ollis in the adventure. I first contacted Pat back in the 50th anniversary year, and she kindly invited me to her home. She was really called Pat Robinson because, scandal, she was married to Dr. Tyler, Rex Robinson, and I had the great pleasure of interviewing them both. And we kept in touch, and even after Rex had died, I would pop in and see her whenever I was Addlestone way, and she always sent a lovely Christmas card and was always interested in what was going on in the world of Doctor Who. I liked her very much, but sadly, since recording this episode of Happy Times and Places, I've learnt from Pat's daughter Kate that she passed away on June the 12th, 2023, at home with her family, and she wanted to be with Rex, and Kate says she's probably up there now, raising a glass with him and with Lenny Mayne, who was a family friend of the Robinsons. So thanks, Pat, and I'd like to, it's not much, but it's heartfelt, dedicate this episode of Happy Times and Places to Patricia Prior, 1929 to 2023. It's Happy Times and Places, but only for so long as you will it to be so, in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a Doctor Who story nominated by a friend, and I have to commentate along to the episodes, trying to guess what my guest's favourite thing about each instalment might be.
Hello there, I'm Siobhan Gallichan, and I've chosen The Three Doctors.
Well, welcome back, everybody, and it's time for the final part of The Three Doctors. It's been, we've been in the throes of Doctor Who's 59th anniversary, but you'll be listening to this sometime after that. No doubt, but we won't have got to the 60th anniversary yet. So there's an exciting build-up now, isn't there? Another landmark. Weird, because it seems to me not that long ago that it was the 50th, which seemed a kind of as big as Doctor Who could ever get. And now the 60th, that's going to be interesting. But I remember the 20th. The 20th was big, and it was, that was when I was, becoming a fan. And it sort of defined my fandom, a lot of the stuff that happened around that period. It was when I went from boy to fan, and I think aware and impressed that Doctor Who was very much embedded in the cultural DNA and was something that would have a landmark. So yeah, the 20th anniversary. But I remember the Five Faces of Doctor Who before that as well, of course, which this was part of. But it was all these sort of moments that it was when we looked back to the past with some sort of sense of awe and appreciation, and then something happened which meant that we looked at the past. Well, I didn't, but people looked at the past, with a sense of superiority, sort of taking credit for all the achievements that had happened betwixt then and now, despite having played no part in them. Which I always think is an odd thing to do. It's a bit like people who are very cocky about how good their football team are, and it's like, but you weren't actually actively involved in any of that. Anyway, yes, I'm proud in Doctor Who, but I won't be standing on the tram going, "Who are you? Who fans am I?" Or whatever. Who are you? But anyway, I'm pleased to come to this final instalment of The Three Doctors, the not really 10th anniversary story, but the story from the 10th season that has the Three Doctors in it, which was an amazing thing to do at that time. And set the precedent for something that's now happened loads and we get a bit blasé about, but this seems to be, and because William Hartnell's in it, I think it's his last performance as the Doctor, last performance ever, I think there's something still rather sort of magical and mysterious about it. So let's choose to start. I'm going to watch from the beginning on my BritBox. You may have a DVD or a Blu-ray, whichever. I wish you luck as we start proceedings in 3, 2, 1. Well, you will not believe the gap between then and now. Me saying press play or whatever, 3, 2, 1 now, and actual now. I've already done this introduction, having had plenty of trouble having to connect a remote sound device to a projector to a Fire Stick, blah 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 blah. And this is the simpler way, because I'm not getting discs out of boxes. And I was going, and I would have watched this on a black and white portable television. And I was just doing all that, explaining that and going, but I must have watched it in black and white, even though I remember John Pertwee's black leather gloves and I remember the colour of his jacket, but that must have been from pictures because we didn't have a colour telly at this point. And then a blooming thing flashes up and says, we're going to install your software update now. I just want to watch television. So yeah, some of the Three Doctors may look like it was made on knackered old technology, but do you know what? At least when something has buttons to press, you either, you can switch it on and off. It doesn't suddenly deny you that privilege. So I'm much more acoustic in my technology. Much more. Anyway, I was thinking on my walk today that I haven't mentioned during this sojourn into Three Doctorsville that of course that Chris Achilleos cover was usurped by a later cover, which I remember finding a couple of copies in the school library, and one was Doctor Who and the Cybermen, which, having had that beautiful picture of Troughton, it's a picture of Troughton from the Three Doctors actually, and an Invasion Cyberman, I was shocked to see had these things that looked like awful Cybermen that weren't like the proper Cybermen. I think Bill Donohoe had done this new cover, which is the Moon and a couple of Cybermen, but those Cybermen are actually what the Cybermen in the Moonbase look like, but not to me. The Cybermen in the Moonbase would look like Invasion Cybermen, because and it's not even called the Moonbase, it's called Doctor Who and the Cybermen. But also the book of the Three Doctors, I love the way that these two are, because they do wind each other up, but they're communicating, and Troughton blowing his cheeks is lovely. And I love this idea of Omega's mood affecting the very environment. I think that's beautiful, and I think the whole thing about his id keeping the world together is fascinating. And I like this, the way that it's a very Troughton thing to do. He does that. He manipulates, he pokes to see, but never, not always with a plan, just to see what will happen. I sometimes resist that idea that Troughton is Machiavellian, and I sometimes just think it's slightly thoughtless writing, like in Tomb, when he seems to for no reason just do the things that cause trouble. But that's because Troughton's Doctor, I think, is maybe too good an actor that you think, well, he can't be up to something. He's this sort of childish guy, but actually, no, he's manipulative. He's very interesting. He is dark, and Troughton, of course, has that wonderful resonance. I love that shot. I think this Omega costume is great, and the beautiful red lighting in this is very, very nice. It's a fantastic mask. But I remember the other Three Doctors book, which was not the one that I had. And this was when I had this sort of thing as a fan going, so do I have to get the books that have got different covers? I never did. I've never had all the ones with all the different covers. And as I'm saying that out loud, I'm kind of regretting that and thinking, what kind of a fan am I? But I'm a real fan of the original targets, really. That's why. But then those reprints, because I have got some. I've got the John Geary Sea Devils, because I was too young for the original one. So yeah, and the reprint of Robot. But anyway, no, I didn't get the reprint of the Three Doctors. And I remember at the time thinking the picture of Troughton looked wrong on it, and it's actually a picture of Troughton as Salamander. That's why it's wrong, because it's somebody had obviously given the artist Patrick Troughton in Doctor Who picture, but it's him as Salamander. So he looks terrible on the cover, even though it's a really good painting. And Pertwee looks good. And Hartnell is in his Astrakhan. I think it's one of the Unearthly Child pictures. But I remember there was a letter to Doctor Who magazine at the time, or that said, that this cover is bad. Pertwee looks too something, can't remember. Troughton looks too bad, and that works. That words for look. He looks like a baddie, and it's a bit bad. And Hartnell looks too Welsh. And until you look at it, you go, but what do you mean he looks so... Oh, he does a bit. So I've always remembered that letter rather fondly. I don't know how you can look Welsh, but I can see what the person was driving at. And I think that's an all-time classic letter to Doctor Who magazine. Well, it must be, because I've remembered it after all these years. This way that Omega is shot in the foreground is very nice, because it's emphasising his height. He's taller even than Pertwee. And Pertwee is tall, and he's towering over Troughton. So that's the use of the sort of size, the use of these three performers, is making up for the shortcomings of what they're standing in front of. And I like the fact that now you see this is going to be hard pressed to beat as a favourite moment. I think this is a brilliant Doctor Who idea. Troughton's superb as well. They're both superb, actually. Each one reacting in a way that complements and contrasts to the other, but each of them emphasising, the great weight of it. And isn't it fascinating that Pertwee, the comedian, is the one who's giving it the sort of dramatic, straight-faced, oh my goodness, this is deadly serious stuff, and Troughton giving it the oh my giddy aunt, I'm this is I'm spooked by this. But what a wonderful idea this is, that is so Doctor Who-y, and he lets out quite a pitiful shriek, which I think really works. I do think Stephen Thorne is occasionally shouty, and as I said earlier in an earlier instalment, I felt a bit bad for him that he gave himself a hard time. It was almost like he'd read a few of the reviews, because he did. There was a phase when it was de rigueur and Doctor Who fandom sort of say Stephen Thorne's a bit shouty because Azar's a bit shouty and Eldred's a bit shouty. But I think that cry that he does is sort of rips the fabric of his world apart. But that idea of somebody who only exists through the force of his own will is such a great Doctor Who idea. And of course, it completely ties in with this, that he's built this world from his imagination. And that's quite a philosophical idea, because we all create the world from our imagination. Now, we don't do it in the Doctor Who way, because we haven't conjured the solid objects, but our own perspective. The world is seen through our own ego, if you like, as well. And if we're not careful, that can be malign and destructive, because we want to shape the world to fit what we want rather than fit into the world. I think it speaks to all sorts of fascinating possibilities that are kind of half explored here, but I think as a metaphor for life and existence, it's really interesting. For using science fiction to do that, I think is great. It's better than kind of a monster of the week. But also it adds a huge level of tragedy to bombastic, all-powerful solar engineer Omega, who bless him, is so sort of sad that the only reason he exists is through the force of his own will. And what does that say about a person's existence? And I think that's really sad, and compelling and interesting, and a cut above some of the ideas I think were sometimes served in Doctor Who. Even though this is a production that sometimes I don't think matches the ambitions of the script and the writers. But, and I think I've mentioned this on other occasions, maybe even earlier in this, is that how culpable are Bob Baker and Dave Martin in this, in the sense that that's a very sort of contrived, well, I'm caught between the two Doctors bit of blocking, but it's kind of charming, and I love everyone involved. And I do like the gel guards when the one who's wobbling up and down there should stop it. I interrupted myself a couple of episodes ago and was going, how many of these people have I met? And I think I've met most of the gel guards as well. Yes, Graham Lehman doesn't normally have a beard when he's in Doctor Who, so I wonder if he was doing something else round about now. I think I might do a little bit on Graham Lehman at some point. I might drop his son a line who I don't know, I've just met that once, but to find out a bit more about him and a bit more about his keenness to perform, even though he had those mobility issues. I love Troughton's braces. Braces are always more fun, I think, to see on other people than they are to wear. I think you've got to, I think there's a knack to pulling them off. I did occasionally wear them when I was at university, but I'd either hitch them too high or too low. But they're a nice idea, aren't they? So yes, that Three Doctors cover it's funny as being a Doctor Who fan, you sort of like what you're used to, and I suddenly saw that as a slight step too far into the modern age. What was wrong with the old covers? It's amazing. I don't know if this is just me, but I do sort of I've spent a lot of time sort of resisting change going on. I find comfort in that thing from before. I feel uncomfortable with that being changed or erased or moved on from. I see it as an insult to the things that have gone before, and I was talking about that in the introduction about actually, I look back with appreciation to the things that paved the way. Now this is at least a slightly better shot of Hartnell. I mean, everything's sort of reflected in the crew and everything are reflected in the TV screen, but at least we get a close up of Hartnell here. I'm sure it's possible to sort of pause it to get a shot of him, but I know because he looks slightly different in those group shots, and that's what I think is quite sad, as I say, that we don't have a close-up of him, that we don't sort of really have a proper account of, because they were all three of them together when they took those publicity photos, and it's actually it is the Hartnell of the publicity photos who's on the cover of the original, the Achilleos cover, and he does look slightly different from the Hartnell we know, because he's old and ill, and in those photos he looks sort of slightly sort of more rounded in the face, but they were there, and I wonder how much chitter chatter there was, how he was on the day. Because you don't actually see them all together in the episode, which you think, oh, that's a mistake. It's like he's so near and yet he's so far, and yet there is, obviously a session where they're all together, just for that, that those publicity shots. And I'd have liked a bit more of an insight into that. Nobody really, I don't think, has given account of that day or that session. Probably only an hour. And there were, I remember Bob Baker and Dave Martin, I think, had sort of said, oh, the reason this story came about was because William Hartnell was knocking on the door and asking for work. Well, history tells us we know that didn't happen. It's more likely the Terrance Dicks version. Well, no, I mean the Bob Baker version did not happen. Hartnell was at home and seemed somebody called him on a good day, and then they wrote the script, and then when they called him back, his wife went, what? Oh no, I think you just got me on a good day. He's not going to be able to do this. But anyway, whatever happened, his ultimate input is very, very limited. But he's still there. He's in that Ealing Film Studio, not in his garage. But again, we don't have any behind-the-scenes shots of that. We don't really have many reports from that day to get much of an angle on Hartnell's last sort of days as an actor and his last contribution to Doctor Who. So even though he's in it, and even though it seems amazing that he's in it, even though he hadn't been in it that long ago, it still seems, because it was the first days of Doctor Who, and because it was black and white, and because Hartnell was dead before I was born, it seemed the idea that he'd almost even touched anything that was in colour seems like, he has crossed some sort of time bridge, and yet not well enough for the reception not to be too fuzzy for us to actually completely get a full and sort of tangible representation of it. Even though he's in all 4 episodes, he's never quite there. The fact that he's not in the videotape studio, but the fact that also all the film stuff is on a monitor. So he's still, he was the Doctor that was dead before I was born. So he was the Doctor that to me was always dead. But even in this thing that he's sort of tangible in, he's just kind of out of reach. Which I think gives it a sort of tragic, not tragic, but a sort of melancholic aspect to Hartnell's contribution, which, is offset by the utter joy of Troughton and Pertwee being so brilliant together. And by all accounts, as I said, not necessarily initially a meeting of method, if not mind, and yet, they then proved to be a great double act at conventions, and John encouraged Pat to do it, the kind of rapport between them, the catty rapport between them is rather fun, and they're a great contrast, and yet they are both Doctor Who, and shows the vast possibilities of the part that still be true to the essence of the character, and yet be totally different interpretations of the role. Now this is a bit that I remember watching this when I had it on bootleg video. Well, not bootleg, it was just a record. It was a recording from the Five Faces, I think. So nice, good quality, but being quite sort of shocked at something that you don't get in this version now, and I'm not sure what I think about that, because I think they've, in the sound of the version that we have now, the restored, tarted up, beautiful, gorgeous, done with such care and precision and expertise and hard work and hours above and beyond the call of duty. I think I'm right in saying that they have taken out the fact that when all of these characters walk through, you then hear their footsteps going down the other side, which sort of makes you go, I mean, come on, this is a landmark production. It's the opening of the season, but it's in many ways so careless. I like the fact that Mr. Ollis refuses to go first. He's by far the sort of least important and high-profile character, but they still don't go, you're the least important character, you go first. He goes, no, I'm definitely not doing it. So, and I like the way that each of the characters sort of walks through the singularity thing in a way that reflects their character. He sort of does this sort of slightly, and then he goes, oh, sorry, and then goes through quite quickly. But Benton sort of protests because he wants to stay and do his duty. So, but no, he goes through. And then the Brigadier, doesn't he? He salutes. So even though it's quite drawn out, it does mean that everybody gets a moment. And I love the fact that the Brigadier says, "Come on, Joe." He normally calls her Miss Grant, but this is emphasising, this is as big as it gets. This is the two doctors, not just one doctor. The doctors are going to sacrifice themselves to, this big villain, the biggest villain we've ever had, a Time Lord villain, the first Time Lord. So this is a big deal, and it's emphasised by the Brigadier going, Joe. I remember being slightly surprised at this line, because I'd read an interview with Nicholas Courtney. Oh no, it's not this line. Here, I like the salute, and again, there's footsteps there. But I remember reading an interview with Nicholas Courtney when it was in Radio Times 20th Anniversary magazine, or one of those, and it said, people ask me who my favourite Doctor is, and I say, splendid chaps, all of them. And then he uses that line. It's not here. It's in the Five Doctors, isn't it? And I was like, oh, so that's not what you say, Nicholas Courtney. That's what the Brigadier says in an episode of Doctor Who. So maybe it wasn't. Anyway, I remember hearing it first from Nicholas Courtney and then seeing the Brigadier do it. I love the fact that, well, one, that this doesn't work, that Omega sort of goes, nah. I also love the fact that Omega is brought down by something as prosaic as a recorder. Yes, it's a recorder caught in the time-space doodah of the TARDIS or whatever, but it's a very Doctor Who-y thing. People hate that bit of the Time Monster where it's a bottle of wine and a mug of tea that do a time experiment, and that is a bit silly. But this, I understand the logic of this. It's something that hasn't converted to antimatter because it fell into the TARDIS. Don't quite know how, but it doesn't matter. But the fact that it is a sort of prosaic, silly object that brings down this great being is a very Doctor Who idea, something very down to earth and very normal. We can another source of energy. Oh, and that's nice. It's that, the energy comes from, and we go, I actually like Roy Purcell's performance as the president, but it is a performance of a certain type. It's striding around in a cape, being very serious. He's not really a person. He's fulfilling a role and a function, but he's doing it with a great stage actor's bearing and diction and presence and all those sorts of things. That so you wouldn't really go for that today, but I like it in the context that it is, and I think he's a nice solid performer that does all the stuff properly. And it's nice to see Graham Lehman in his last Doctor Who, but I know I've talked about him at length in The Macra Terror and The Seeds of Death commentaries and Fury from the Deep. I've done all his stories bar Colony in Space. I love the fact that Mr. Ollis, Laurie is great at doing this slightly pissed off confusion thing. So yes, the footsteps down the back of the wall of singularity have been minimised by the restoration to make it better. But I think they're interesting artifacts of the original production. So I'm not sure I'm wild about them being minimised, because that, to me, crosses a line, and I can count the restoration team amongst very good friends of mine. But I understand the reason for doing it. I equally understand the reason for not doing it, and I think there are good arguments in both, and there are flawed arguments in both. You can see the camera in the screen here, but I think I prefer mine. What the audience at the time would have heard. But anyway, the pictures are beautiful. The sound's much better mixed. Oh, Troughton! I love the way even Troughton even waves. And I think they got rid of his reflection in the console as well, didn't they? They've tidied up a few bits of the Three Doctors, which I suppose makes it better because it is quite a tatty production. It's extraordinary that Doctor Who could do that. It is one of the tattiest Doctor Who productions, and it's the one where they've got to the trouble of getting all three Doctors together, and they go, should we bother to give the place a lick of paint? Not really. Just stick a telly on the wall and stick some bubble wraps on some flats. I loved John Levine's little sort of slightly put upon look there of going, oh, but what am I supposed to do? He's great at making Benton sort of lovably inept. He's like a kind of loyal dog who you kind of feel sorry for, but would stay by your side through thick and thin. I do love Sergeant Benton. And I remember not really getting this when I watched it first, and my brother's explaining, the Doctor's been exiled to Earth, and this is his release from that. And then that suddenly made sense to me of what the unit thing was about. I hadn't realised it had been as sort of formalised as that. And that's an interesting thing to think about when we think of the sort of timeline of Doctor Who. Because now, if they did a thing like that, said, right, the Doctor's going to be exiled to Earth, we go, hang on, you're changing the format here. But again, because this had happened before I was born, it was part of the show's history, and so just part of its interesting and rich tapestry of this eclectic and changeable series of variety. And but now I think we would be much more cautious of that, going, hang on, you're not quite doing the thing Doctor Who has been a program at travelling through space and time, and this much loved era began with you're not allowed to travel through space and time anymore. Hello, Pat. I'm about to write Christmas cards to each of these two, lovely Pat and lovely Laurie, who live not far away from each other and delightfully get the end of the episode. And I think it's one of the great episode endings in the whole of Doctor Who. One, I love the fact that Pat gets the final shot. Lenny Mayne does that with Wendy Danvers, who's also nonagenarian Doctor Who survivor at the end of Curse of Peladon. Amazonia getting the close up of the TARDIS taking off, having delivered a Doctor Who. But I love that the final shot is of Pat, which is lovely. Pat Robinson, she's called really, but Patricia Prior widow of Rex Robinson, Dr. Tyler, and Laurie Webb there as Mr. Mr. Ollis. I think they're the Hollises, aren't they? In the book. Ollis seems like even the name is speaking in a sort of cod regional accent as these characters sort of doing these things. So we'll call him Mr. Ollis. You mean Hollis, don't you? Yeah, Hollis. So it's almost like the credits and the script have sort of rendered the name in dialect rather than as it actually is. I've never come across an Ollis. I know many are Hollis. And yeah, I'm sure they're Hollis in the book, or I just added the H because I myself, but I'm sure it's Hollis in the book. But and I remember thinking, was Ollis a mistake until I actually, saw the episodes again years later when I was conscious of such stuff. I hadn't remembered from the Five Faces of Doctor Who whether it was Ollis or Hollis. But I love that ending. I love the way that Laurie opens his mouth as if to tell her and then just goes, "You never believe me, supper ready." Ha 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 ha. I think that's a glorious, glorious moment. So for me, my two choices for this come to me straight away. I don't have to struggle. Much as it's lovely having Hartnell there, much as the Trout and Pertwee combo is as good, if not better, than you could ever have imagined and hoped for. Much as there are some choice lines in there as well. My two favourite things are my favourite thing and my bonus favourite thing. I suppose my favourite thing from the episode. Well, they're both from this episode. So my favourite thing from episode 4 and my bonus thing is also from episode 4. My favourite thing from episode 4 is therefore Omega existing by the force of his will. I think it's a really interesting, fascinating, really philosophically thought through idea that works in terms of the science fiction, but also gives us something to think about if we want to, and reflect about how we create our own world and what that actually means, and then think about what it means for this fictional character in this thing who is this big bombastic creature, all powerful seemingly, but actually is nothing but an idea held together by sort of ego and hope. And I think that opens up all sorts of extraordinary possibilities. It allows for that gorgeous universe-rending wail that could cut a hole through which tear into the fabric of the universe so that a black hole appears of Omega and Stephen Thorne. So good. Brilliant idea, really tragic. Looks slightly better on this than I recall it looking, again when I was watching as a very self-conscious youth, not when it was on Five Faces Doctor Who, but when I came to revisit it and found it very disappointing. The CSO in that scene, I think, has been slightly improved in restoration. I'm less bothered about that, interestingly, because it makes it slightly easier to watch, because I remember that scene being a bit pony. And you want that scene to be there for the concept and the idea, not to be being distracted by huge fringes on all the CSO elements. And I'm aware that makes me a total hypocrite, because I'm resistant to the diminution of the hobnail boots on wooden steps. That is suggesting a mystical transportation through space and time and antimatter. But yeah, so I love that. And my bonus thing is the thing we have to end on, which is that great ending. I love Mr. Ollis. He's hardly got any lines, but I love his presence in the show. And not that he's... Because Doctor Who can often do sort of down-to-earth working class characters, and they're there for comic relief, but it's all a bit patronising, and they're all a bit sort of wide-eyed and kind of, I don't really understand this, and I'll do as I'm told. Ollis is kind of... He kind of sort of takes it all in his stride, but not in an awed way, in a kind of, sort of taciturn acceptance and a slight sort of disapproval of all this sort of avant-garde nonsense, you know. Don't want all this rubbish, you know. I always say about my granddad that he was quite a fascinating man, interesting man, very principled man, and very well read, even though he'd left school I don't think he'd even properly been educated, and he'd sort of he was in a children's home and all sorts of things, but like cauliflower, like cheese, but put them together, and that was warlockery. So limited in certain ways, but in a way that's sort of strangely kind of admirable, even though it is very sort of closed-minded. But it is in a kind of, well, I've got time for that nonsense kind of way. And I love all of that. I think Laurie captures that so brilliantly, and especially and as I say, when I was going to interview him, I thought he would be like that, a bit of a sort of man of few words, because that's the sort of part. And he's not at all. He's Laurie Webb, and he's always lovely, and how are you? And so the fact that he's the complete opposite of that as well, of course, he's an actor. But I think he inhabits that character so well. But then that he opens his mouth and then can't be bothered, and then just goes, "You'd never believe me, woman, supper ready." The perfect ending to a Doctor Who story. The lunacy is over. Can I just have my tea? That's Doctor Who. That's Doctor Who. I've been to a world created by the id of a megalomaniacal, tragic figure that creates gel monsters out of the force of his imagination. And I've been driving around this antimatter world in an Edwardian roadster that is owned by two aspects of the same person, who is a benevolent alien from outer space who has a time-traveling telephone box. And yeah, I'm just going to get on with my life now. Love it. Love it. Love it. What does Siobhan Gallichan like from episode 4 and from the Three Doctors as a whole?
Part 4. This one. Ooh. I think, excuse me, I think we're going to have to go for the revelation that Omega doesn't have a body anymore. It's horrifying. All that exists now is his will, and it can exist because of where he is. If he isn't there, then his will can't exist. And it's quite horrific, really, when you stop and think about it. It's just a moment of cold horror right in the middle of all this coziness. And it isn't dwelt upon as if to say, oh, the horror, the horror. Yeah, Omega goes completely nuts, and understandably. But there's no proper treatise of, oh my God, isn't this dreadful, blah, 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 blah. It's just something that happens. But when you stop and think about it, it's really quite horrific. And my overall thing, I'm going to beg your indulgence on this. The first thing I want to say is it's not smug. This isn't my choice, but the Three Doctors isn't smug, unlike a lot of multi-doctor stuff. There, especially on the television, it's smug. The Five Doctors was smug. Dimensions in Time was smug. Let's bring everybody else out for the panto walk down. The Three Doctors isn't. It's just the opening story of the 10th season. Yep, Pat and Bill are in it, but it's not a huge thing. I mean, it became a huge thing, but all we had was that, and of course the wonderful 10th anniversary special, the Holy of Holies. But that, like I say, that's not what I'm going to go for. Seeing as, even though this wasn't deliberately planned to be an anniversary story, but we've always thought it is, and seeing as it's the 60th next year, I'm saying next year because hopefully Toby's released this on the 50th anniversary of the Three Doctors. I have no idea. I want to actually go for Doctor Who itself. And I know I'm cheating here, but whilst I was thinking all this through, yes, I've actually thought about it, it occurred to me, I wonder what my life would be like if Doctor Who didn't exist. And I can't imagine it. I genuinely can't. My social life is built around Doctor Who. Not the. That's not. It's the initial way I meet with people, and with some people, it's the whole. It's what you talk about. But without it, God knows what. I genuinely cannot imagine what my life would be without it. I mean, seriously, to your listeners, just stop and think for a second. If it didn't exist, it never existed, what would your life be like now? So that is my overall thing. Doctor Who itself. I'm sorry, I know it's a cheat, but it's an anniversary story, sort of. So if I can't bung this in here, where can I bung it in? Sorry, Toby.
Oh, do you know what? I've nothing to forgive. I thought that was lovely. Let's address the first bit. I do take the point about the three Doctors not being smug, and sometimes, and I think it's difficult as Doctor Who's gone on to sort of acknowledge its past and revel in its status without sort of too reverential, and part of Doctor Who's charm almost is that it was sort of knocked together without any sense of its own importance, which is impossible to escape when you've been going 60 years, because it would seem a bit odd if you just went, oh, this old thing. But the 10 years wasn't quite enough to be sort of to look like you're sort of staring at your own navel or patting yourself on the back, especially as, of course, they don't. So yes, I've always been a bit off with the three Doctors for being a bit tatty and not having much of a sense of occasion in terms of the production. I mean, having the Time Lords back and your enemy as the founder of time travel and all of that, as well as the three Doctors. There's an attempt at grandiosity there. But the fact that the production is on the tatty, maybe that's a blessing, and if that's the payoff for not being sort of too full of itself, maybe that's maybe be careful what you worry about, Toby. So that's a very interesting perspective. I love the fact that we both chose Omega's existence only through sheer will, and it is a horrifying idea, but that's the beauty of all of this stuff. It's a horrifying idea, but it's a philosophical idea. It's also very sad. I mean, the fact that they do acknowledge that they're having to essentially do the humane thing, which is to destroy Omega, because there's a tragic element to Omega's existence and ability to only exist in that universe, and that's a prisoner of his own mind. I mean, really, which is again a brilliant concept, a really thought-provoking concept, but actually rather a sad one. But it's also funny, and it's also daft, and it's also very cozy, but action-packed and a bit scary. Yes, please. And this is a story that's nowhere near my favourite. So this is really interesting, because I'm loving this and sort of talking about it and enunciating all of these things that come to mind because of a thought-provoking contribution from Siobhan, and the fact that I'm, forced to do so by commentating along as I'm watching the pictures and trying to articulate what it is that appeals and what it is that beguiles about each particular Doctor Who adventure, and in this case, this one, which then opens Siobhan out to that observation about, gosh, where would we be without Doctor Who? Oh, and yes, this sorry, Siobhan, this has been released slightly before the 50th anniversary of the Three Doctors, but only about a month before, which I think is kind of right, because the story was released a little bit before the 10th anniversary as well. They just at the end of the year before. I'm sort of grasping at straws and whatever. I just fancied. I did do this. I recorded this at around the 59th anniversary of Doctor Who itself. So in a way, it's appropriate to Siobhan's last observation about, think about life without Doctor Who. I cannot think of my life without Doctor Who. It has shaped my life. I mean, part of me, the idea of being a professional Doctor Who fan appalls me, though. This is still my hobby. The fact that it's crossed over into some of my work. But if my obituary says he did Doctor Who fan related, he was a professional Doctor Who fan, I would feel awful. Doctor Who is what takes me away from all of the other things of life, including work. I suppose I've just turned my hobby into a demonstrative one that I want people to look at me doing. No, I don't know. I've just taken my joy for the show and tried to communicate it. I found out stuff for my own amusement and interest, and then tried to convey that to others, and sort of have found an audience. But for me, it's much more personal for me than professional Doctor Who, even though I'm doing this. But this is partially about that sort of communication, and people, seem to want to listen to what I might have to offer, and I hope I do it well. I do it to the best of my ability. But my enjoyment of Doctor Who is nothing to do with really anything I might have done, sort of in terms of work or anything like that. My enjoyment of Doctor Who is sort of is totally pure, and it's always sort of taken me away from things that are uncomfortable, taken me back to things that were comfortable, or taken me back to times that weren't comfortable, but where Doctor Who was the only comfortable things in them. I'm nostalgic about my childhood, and yet I didn't particularly enjoy my childhood. I found my childhood quite difficult. But somehow when Doctor Who was in it, it wasn't. So it makes me nostalgic for a time that was difficult, but takes away the difficult times, which is extraordinary. So it made me escape from my childhood then, and it takes me back to it now, when as an adult you look back and go, oh, you didn't know how lucky you were. In terms of comparatively, I had a much more comfortable childhood than most people born before I was born, and most people who were born in some different parts of the world from where I was fortunate enough to be born. So but everything is relative. I have sort of covered this in a podcast recently as well, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But I cannot imagine my life without Doctor Who. There's not a day goes by where I don't think about some aspect of Doctor Who. That there are not things that there's still things that I would be fascinated to find out, and sometimes disappear down a wormhole trying to find out. There are podcasts that I listen to, programs that I watch, books that I read, that are all largely about Doctor Who. I've got a very one-track mind, although Doctor Who is a very broad canvas. So one day I might read a factual book about somebody that was in Doctor Who, and another day I might read a work of fiction expanding the Doctor Who universe. So I'm not one-track minded. Actually, usually let's be honest. Even as I was saying that, I was going, don't lie. I don't read much Doctor Who. I don't read any Doctor Who fiction. I read Doctor Who facts. I like researching the history of the show. That is what interests me. I like finding out about the people who were in it, the personalities, the way that things were made, all the mysteries, the things that we don't know about certain stories because we don't have the paperwork and we don't quite know how that was done, or there are things that we don't know simply because we don't know them because we don't have that paperwork or testimony or whatever. The fact that it's so interesting to research, but mostly it's a show that I love watching, and I have actually been watching for pleasure a bit recently, as well as doing it for these podcasts. But these podcasts give stories I know and love, on some I don't love particularly, a new lease of life, because I'm watching them with an eye to conveying enthusiasm about them. I'm watching them having consorted, albeit remotely and with a pre-record, from somebody else who I like, who I admire, who might have a different perspective, or whose personality shines through and gives a different lens through which to view something. And I think all of that is fascinating. I'm not a terribly sociable person. I can talk like this, as you could tell, 19 to the dozen, but I find social situations quite awkward. But I find talking about Doctor Who, a few ums and ers aside, for which I apologise, he says, doing an I find talking about Doctor Who easy, and I get enthused, and it makes me perhaps sort of come out of my shell a little bit more in a way that I don't necessarily hugely in public. I find this sort of socialising a lot easier because nobody here. And yet I like the people I've met through Doctor Who, and I've met some interesting, fascinating people in it. It's only when I sort of, because I'm not very good at sort of keeping in touch, even particularly so when I then touch base with somebody that I don't normally have a chat to or whatever through doing this process, it's a reminder of what an interesting and broad church Doctor Who fandom is, and how you always benefit from meeting people from different backgrounds with different perspectives who are like you in some way because they like Doctor Who, but they might like different things about it, or just give you pause for thought, or give you a new perspective, or tell you a new fact. I mean, which is all great. But beyond that, beyond the socializing, the commonality that one shares with friends and strangers who know and like Doctor Who, it's an amazing show. There's nothing like it. It's unique. It's a one-off. It's a mixture of huge ambition and sometimes under ambitious application of technology. It's a program of huge scale and scope that is nonetheless made out of the things that exist today, because what else can you do? It's a program of big ideas that and sometimes limited expression. It's a program of huge wit and great emotion that sometimes tries to convey both of those in laughably prosaic ways. But it's such a good idea. It has scope for so many things, and it's and it's fun. It never loses that. Or at its best, it doesn't lose that desire to entertain. Yes, it can do satire. Yes, it can do politics. Yes, it can try and be, try to be, intelligent and thoughtful. But its primary purpose, surely, is to entertain and be fun and exciting and frightening for kids. And if it doesn't do that, it's kind of doing it wrong, I think. And if a kid still exists inside of you, and I think we do retain our childhood selves within us, and sometimes they're quite damaged. The fact that Doctor Who still speaks to them and still puts a smile on their face is, I think, rather miraculous. And like Omega, I think we all create our world in our own image, and we all create Doctor Who in our own image. It is the thing that morphs around us like a sort of comfort blanket, but that comfort comes from different things and manifests itself in different ways. So yeah, I'll take that, Siobhan. It is slightly cheating, but I think that is acceptable on this occasion and with this story. And thank you for that, because it made me think, and then probably sound quite pretentious because really it's just it's a silly sci-fi show for kids, and yet it's obviously more than that. Otherwise we wouldn't all be here. Siobhan is going to plug everything that she does, which is a few things. I mean, Siobhan's been around as long as I can remember, at fan events and in fan things, and is always very nice company, always. And Siobhan was saying she doesn't want anniversary stories to be smug. That is something that Siobhan would never be, is smug, and almost not almost self-deprecating to a fault, actually self-deprecating to a fault. But I think it's better that than to be the other way. But has brought a lot of entertainment and happiness to others herself. So let's see what she's all about in terms of pluggage and the way that she celebrates and communicates her love for Doctor Who.
Right. Okay. This is the bit where I'm allowed to plug myself for now. Okay, even though I'm completely irrelevant nowadays, I still do a couple of internet shows. They're on YouTube. You've either got the Flashing Blade Live, which is recorded live on Twitch, or Two Fan Dinosaurs, which is a similar thing to what Toby's doing, but there's two of us, myself and Dr. Sinister, not his real name. And because we're old fans, we know all the old stories, all the apocrypha, all the silly stories, and that's what you're going to get from our commentaries. We occasionally mention John Abineri. Occasionally. So, you can find us on the YouTube channel, Bibble Thruster. Spelt like it sounds, Bibble Thruster. Oh dear. I really didn't think that through. Toby, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this. And thank you so much for doing these podcasts. Listening to podcasts is a busman's holiday for me, so I don't do it. But I do listen to your podcast. You're the only podcast I listen to. I just hope I stay along long enough to see you get to the end of Too Much Information. It's either that or the pickles are going to run out. So thank you again, and I'd better say goodbye. Goodbye. How do I stop this?
Thank you, Siobhan. Not irrelevant. Won't have that. Told you. Self-deprecating to a fault. That's really kind words. And Siobhan is a patron of these podcasts as well. So one of the people that ensures that they keep going and remain ad-free and mean that I can spend, proper time doing them so that they're, at least hopefully put together. I mean, I don't edit out all of the ums. I mean, there's a line. I mean, they would be better without, but hopefully that buys me time to do the Too Much Informations, which are, much harder to put together and, written, rewritten, cross-check, double-check, blah-de-blah-de-blah. I'm trying to speed up with those. We will get there. I'm just trying to get some stability. I'm an itinerant player, so it's hard to sort of do it every time I think, I've got a week clear that I can nobble off a whole load of Too Much Informations. I then get, what have I had this week? A voiceover for the National Trust. That was nice. Also, I was watching an advert for an airline the other day, and I suddenly remembered, I went, aren't I the English voice on something like Eritrea Airlines or somewhere? I'd completely forgotten about this job that I'd done, but there's an airline like one of them, where all the English instructions are me. I quite like that. Obviously I prefer it when I'm doing, drama acting or comedy acting. That's my job. But I do quite like the sort of the fact that I sort of pop up in all strange places. And so I'm lucky that I have this kind of strange, peripatetic, never 2 days the same existence. But it means I can never quite get a proper pattern of organisation. So everything I do is a little bit scattergun. But I'm not sure I'd have it any other way. But it means you have to sort of bear with me when you sort of consume my stuff. But I'm grateful that it's to your taste enough that you're happy to ladle it down. Right. So thanks to Siobhan. Please do avail yourself of her broadcasts. She's, again, somebody that just puts the enthusiasm for the show out there, and that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? And it is a great show. I do love Doctor Who, but I think I'm going to see if my supper's ready. Love it. I love it. Thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest this time around is Siobhan Gallichan, who can be found on Twitter at SIO, the first three letters of Siobhan, Gallichan, SIO Gallichan. I'm grateful to Siobhan, who is also one of the patrons of Toby Hadoke's Times Travels, as are the following: Mr. Withit, Rhys Williams, Chris Williams, Rich Wiggins, Kevin West, Peter Ware, Gavin Ware, Alistair Wallace, Jeff Walker, Gary Wales, Lee Wakerley, John Turner, Van Man Sang, Sidney Truitt, Jason Thompson, Dr. Gary Thomas, Paul Taylor-Greaves, Mark Swain, Adam Stone, Chris Stokes, David Spofford, David Spencer, Andrew Snedden, Richard Smith, Trevor Smith, and Brian Sinclair, and many more, to whom I'm all grateful. The music is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. I think that should have been all of whom, to whom I'm grateful. No, I'm grateful to all of whom. Anyway, all of those people I mentioned, I am grateful to, and indeed all of the other patrons whose names get mentioned on different occasions and on different episodes and at different regularity depending on the tier of their patronage, because it all starts from £3 a month. That gets you pretty much everything. There are things that lure you further up the ladder, £5, £10, £20. There are other bits and bobs, but, all of the general stuff, the name mentioning, the bonus material, the exclusive podcasts, the monthly AMAs, various other little goodies. In fact, I put some goodies from my archive up recently, one of which turned out to be missing from the BBC radio archive and is now safely back there. So there's all sorts of other little sort of bits and bobs that go on there that are quite fun. So that's all at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. I know it seems a bit weird, me coming cap in hand to you now. I don't particularly like it, but it's the way we freelancers have to do things these days, and hopefully you get bang for your buck. There's 3 releases a week in Patreonville, and the patronage thing enables me to do these properly in, using proper recording equipment, decent microphone, and give proper time to editing it and making it good and paying the musicians and all of that sort of thing. So you can go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. But I know times are tough, and these things all come out eventually. And but if you want to occasionally contribute because you can, or because I sound particularly hungry, or I do a particular thing that you just think, it deserves a coffee, even a metaphorical one, spelt badly, that's at ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, which is a sort of tip jar, basically, where you can say tar with hard cash, which is, again, the way of things these days. But what costs you nothing, because I know times are tough, and as winter closes in and the recession takes its grip, and we seem to be travelling back to the 1970s, and not in a good way, not the way they made telly then, but all the bad ways. You can do what costs you nothing, which is go to iTunes or Spotify or all those places you get your podcasts and give these 5 stars and a glowing review. That really, really does help. Thank you. And you can spread the word in cyberspace. Hadoke Podcasts is the special Twitter feed that is all things about these podcasts. And I'm on @Toby Hadoke, where I plug these, but also do other things. Talk about Doctor Who, do lame jokes, plug things that I'm doing. I also have a Facebook page, Toby Hadoke, the comedian page, which has a picture of me performing stand-up comedy rather than my personal page, which is becoming more of a personal thing, and the work stuff. If we've never met, just go to the other one. It's still me. It just means that, if I want to put pictures up of my kids, I could do that in private on my normal one, and if I want to, plug some show that I've done that my next door neighbour doesn't really need to know about, we do that. It's the way of things. I'm reluctant with this modern world. It's all about sort of self-expression and pushing yourself, which I'm not massively comfortable with. Yes, I am when it's performance. That's a slightly different thing. That's not what this is it? Oh, dearie me, no. Anyway, do that social media thing. Yes, and please just tell your friends, I think. Yeah, tell your friends, spread the word, but keep listening, and I'm really grateful that you do so. You're splendid chaps, all of you, and that includes those of you who aren't chaps. I think chaps is all encompassing, isn't it? I think chaps means everybody. But in case you feel it doesn't apply to you, if you're not a chap, you're still splendid. If you're listening to this, you're splendid, and I hope you're very happy. I think I've done enough talking this episode, so there won't be too much post-credits chitter-chatter. I think I'm just going to exit through a point of singularity in the way that God, well, or at least Lenny Mayne and Barry Letts, intended. Goodbye.